This is Michelle, and you're listening to Words with Michelle, the podcast, a show where I sit down and have conversations with influencers on a range of topics, anything from natural hair, employment, discrimination, food, relationships, and everything in between. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you want to send me an email, hit me up at michelle@wordsmichelle.com. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Words with Michelle, the podcast. I gotta be honest with you, I've recorded a ton of shows in the past few weeks, but after speaking with this calming, soothing lady, I had no choice but to post her episode next. Today I'm speaking with Jothi Saldanha, a certified transformational coach, spiritual leader, educator, and interdisciplinary artist. Due to the pandemic and just the pressures of life, I tend to feel overwhelmed and then shut down. With this episode, I wanted to help others and also myself, so I immediately thought of Jothy, who I interviewed for my blog a number of years ago. I just remembered how incredibly peaceful our conversation was. So I brought her back to share with all of you why we need to take care of ourselves mentally. She goes deep, y'all. Jothy speaks about wellness, forms of wellness, decolonizing wellness, dealing with cultural wellness, past emotional wounds, among others. So please welcome Jothy to the show.
Hi there, my name is Jothy of Jothy Creative Wellness and Her Space. I am a transformational coach, and what that means is that I use a variety of healing modalities to create safe and sacred space to engage with folks of all walks of life in their healing journey and what it looks like to reclaim those spaces that were hurt or violated and how we move through that and get to the other side and reclaim our space back. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
So how important is to have a form of wellness in your life?
Well, you know, as we all know, we're going through really trying times and uncertainty is at its key. And I feel like what I've heard a lot of people say is that they're sort of coming back to a place of taking inventory of what's important in their lives, because there's so much turmoil and uncertainty going on in the world that it's like, where do I stand when it comes to my own mental health, my own spiritual health, my own physical health? What's important to have around me, as in relationships within my home? What does my home look like? So we've been sort of forced to look at our own lives in a sense. And I feel like wellness can take on so many forms. I mean, it's very unique to every individual, but it's really about keeping in our consciousness what is going to help us to get through these times. What is going to help us to get through adversity? Because at the end of the day, we're going to have adversity. There's going to be change. There's going to be fluctuations in relationships within our lives. It's how do we cope? How do we manage? How do we manage the stress? How do we manage the turmoil? Sometimes there's grief in there. We have loss. So how do we manage these spaces? And the only way to do that is to really take a look at how we manage our wellness. So if we are stretched thin, working, parenting, taking care of family, giving, it's like, where do we find the space to, one, rest and sort of, decompress from everything we've exuded or put out? And then how do we put back in? How do we refuel? And I think we take that for granted, those pieces, because we just keep going. We just go. We're on auto drive. And quite often I've seen clients, they go through this roller coaster. So they'll be on auto drive, give. Then they gas out. They hit a wall, they hit overwhelm, they get stressed, then they crash, right? And then they go down, and they just want to be left alone. And it impacts relationships, and you get angry, you get resentful. Things start to happen and snowball. And then you that's when you rest, that's when you take a break, and then you go back up the hill. And I'm trying to get clients to create some more peaceful sense of living, where it's ease and flow, and you're giving and you're taking and you're receiving, and it's goes both ways. So we're refueling, we're integrating wellness practice into our daily and weekly routine so that we don't have these crash and burn moments, you know. And then there's that idea too of our past not being, maybe there hasn't been closure in certain hurts and pains. Maybe there's some things that are still haunting us or still holding us back at the depth of some of our pain and our coping. There's been this space of earlier hurts and like traumas that people hold, and that ends up informing so much of the ways we cope. So I'm here to sort of get to that root cause, the root of our pain. So why did this one situation yesterday trigger me and send me over the edge? Yeah, I'm tired, but like, why did I react in that way? So really allowing clients to have space to get deep and to go deep and to sort of unpack some things. So that way the healing is real and it's impactful, because then we can uncover some of those layers to see who we truly are at the end of the day.
Like I can actually identify with, like I would say 90% of what you just said. I could completely identify. Can you share some forms of wellness that you participate in? Like what forms of wellness do you do?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a creative. So I love anything creative, anything using our hands, whether it's art making processes, creative, doing something in terms of creative processing, whether it's writing. So a lot of the times, it's really, some of us have lost our words or lost our voice or been silenced, been disregarded, where the throat chakra is closed. So I find that sometimes, and this was me, in my own process, I couldn't quite find the words to speak my truth, to speak to those difficult emotions. So I'll have clients go through a creative process where they can express themselves in a different way, because it's not always possible for people to use their voice, but it might be possible for them to write down their words. It might be possible to write down their story or describe their experience. And it might be possible to put that into color, into paint, into movement, into creating an art piece that describes how they're feeling or their experience. So I use creativity. And then I did a sacred leadership process in 2017 with Sacred Women International. And it was a year-long process. And what that process taught me was to use spirituality as a center and a core to everything I do. So grounding a space in spirituality. And it doesn't mean religion in that context. It doesn't mean, Catholic or Christian or any sort of structured religion. It's more about knowing that there's a higher power at play, and we come from this higher power, and we are created within this higher power with all of the things that we need within us. So we can manifest what we need from within us. We have the abundance that we need. We have a wellspring of knowledge and wisdom within us. It's just those layers of hurt that have put self-doubt on there and deemed us unworthy or irresponsible or whatever it is. Those layers of hurt have clouded our vision. So I use spiritual tools and practices to help us to see ourselves, to get back to that center. And I always liken it to when we were when we were conceived and then born. You know how there's all of this love, usually, not a lot around my birth there wasn't, but usually there's this anticipation and this love, and everyone's just so joyous and seeing this baby. There's no expectation of this baby, There's zero expectation, but this baby has changed and shifted a family in such a profound way with its innocence and its very light and presence. So I want people to start to tap into that divine essence of themselves without all the layers that we, our family, society puts on us. So it's really interesting to use spiritual practice in that way. And I also learned in that practice that ancestral wisdom is very important. As much as I support people in healing from ancestral pain, I also support people into tapping into ancestral wisdom, because we all come from somewhere. We've all come from a lineage of people that have left a legacy for us to continue. And sometimes those legacies have been painful. So they have, even in their pain, we can learn and grow. So I bring in ancestral practice and tapping into that wisdom, because that is so powerful. So there's so many things in that spiritual realm that we can tap into, and practices that I can share. And then I just did a course in neuro-linguistic programming and quantum time healing. And what those are, so neuro-linguistic programming really takes a look at the subconscious mind. So we have our conscious mind, and I always describe it this way. Our conscious mind is sort of like the neck up, okay? What you see, what people hear from you, what you present, right? Mm-hmm. And then the unconscious mind is from the neck down. It's what is in your heart, what's within you, what what sits in your body from maybe past traumatic experiences, some of the preconceived perception, some of your biases, everything that sort of sits below the surface. It's like an iceberg, right? So you see the tip, that's what everybody sees, but underneath the surface, what you've developed over time within your subconscious. And so neuro-linguistic programming speaks to that space and starts to unpack some of those spaces where we've held on to the pain and the biases and the sort of the self-talk and some of that, how we view the world based on what we've been taught, what's been projected onto us, and so on and so forth. So neuro-linguistic programming takes a beautiful approach in looking at that space. So the neuro-linguistic programming approach is really looking at this subconscious space and helping people to, again, go deep and start looking at our patterns, our behaviors, what's shown up in relationships. It's not by accident, right, that we get triggered in the same way by certain people, by certain personalities. It's not by accident. So really asking people to bring their awareness to what their subconscious is telling them, or how it's leading them. And then quantum time healing is a really beautiful approach in utilizing this idea of going back in time, but not immersing ourselves within the trauma again, but taking a higher consciousness approach to looking at the space and saying, let's move through it. Let's face it together, because some of us haven't even had the chance to process some of the stuff we've been through, right? You just go through it and you're expected to just keep going. So it's this higher consciousness look and observation of what happened, and walking with the client towards a future that can get rid of that pain, can allow that pain to be healed, and to it really empower them in a way to take responsibility now as adults, right? Going forward. It's a beautiful approach. It's really, I can't even, it's so hard to describe, but it's so impactful and so simple. There's simple tools that you can use that I impart.
Some really good outcomes coming out from that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful blend of all of those. It's a beautiful blend of all of those. I don't necessarily use just one, or I might just use one depending on the client. So it's a really interesting blend. It's like a little full scope, holistic approach to the healing process, and then the reclamation process, because I feel like those are two different spaces. Mm-hmm. Like people need time for healing. People need that safe space for holding. And that's a whole process in and of itself. But then on the other side, like, how do we now integrate and maintain and manage our wellness so that we can live the fullness of who we are, and live that full life that we deserve?
So tell
Yeah.
me a bit about, I know you may have spoken about it in the beginning, like a little bit, but tell me a bit more about her space. What exactly is her space?
Yeah, well, Her Space was born. I actually launched last year, September 2019. And the reason it came about was because I was noticing that there weren't a lot of spaces, one, for women, just for women to be able to talk candidly and openly in a judgment free and safe space about our own experiences and our own trauma and our own healing and what we need. And when I was finding those spaces, I was finding them to be sort of one off events or one off workshops. And I felt like I was wanting more out of it, like a process, a little bit of a let's journey together in this process. It's one thing to meet someone or be amongst a group of women that are healing, and then it's another thing to journey with them through the
Mm,
healing. There's
yeah.
two different things, right? So I really wanted to create a process, create an experience for women to be able to do this together over the course of 4 weeks, 7 weeks, 6 weeks, however we position it, but definitely like a series, right? And then I noticed also that there wasn't a lot of space for women of color. And I noticed, and I know that this has become something much bigger than I ever expected because of what's happening out in the world. But there's this idea that there's this experience that there's many experiences that I've had out here where I find myself to be the only woman of color in a wellness circle.
Mm,
And what that does is it further isolates
yeah.
and further perpetuates this feeling of loneliness in it. And that's so counteractive to healing. You don't want to feel alone in it. You want to feel heard. You want to feel like you've been acknowledged, your pain is acknowledged. And now, how can, and I ask myself very clearly at that point, how can a white woman acknowledge a brown, Black, Indigenous woman's experience or trauma when it's different? It's
That's,
different.
oh, that's so true. I never thought about it, but you're right. Because you want at least to have some sort of, not compassion, but relatability.
Relate,
Yeah.
yeah, the relatability piece. And even in knowing that there are still times where I find myself the only woman of color in white spaces, just generally speaking.
Mhm.
So that experience and weaving in this idea of colonization and how it's impacted our people, period. Um, from where our roots are from, right down to this very present day, and that trauma has caused so much pain throughout our ancestors that we are here now in this very moment, understanding what that pain must have been like. And I can't relate to what a Black woman might have gone through with her ancestral path. So it's really important in her space that I bring in Black women facilitators. I will not cross that boundary, that line, because it's so important to me that there's representation and that relatability piece. Just like if I were to want to get a therapist, I would much rather a therapist of color and a woman for that matter. So it's really important that we have that adaptive approach where we're looking at this culture and the backgrounds and understanding that there's so many intersections. People have all sorts of layers, and we're dynamic. So when you see white wellness, quote unquote, it's very sort of surface. And I'm not putting down anyone. It's your way, and that's great, but I just feel like there's many more layers for folks of color. There's many more layers for the LGBTQ2S plus folks. There's many layers for, it's just depending on where you're from. There's going to be additional layers of healing that we need to acknowledge. And it's not acknowledged in white wellness. So, and another thing I noticed too when I think about decolonizing wellness is that ancient practices are being used in wellness spaces, but they're not being honored. You know, for example, I'll walk into women's wellness circles where they're burning sage, or they'll play a drum, or they'll chant Sanskrit mantras, or they'll play certain things on their Bluetooth, and have crystals and medicine wheels and all sorts of different ancient indigenous practices. And if we're not honoring the root of these practices, we we are doing it an injustice. We are further colonizing. That's a further colonization of our practices. And you know, they've commodified it, and really you know, it's problematic. So I want to bring, just in general, my practice based in ancient wisdom, but really honoring where it comes from, honoring the land, that the stolen land that we work on, honoring my ancient Hindu practices, honoring Black Indigenous practices, African Indigenous practices, you know, really serving from a place of honor, you know, because people died for those practices. So we can't take that for granted, you know?
Wow, that's true. I never thought of that, you know? Like, I love the way you said that. Like, they're not honoring it. They're not giving it, they commoditize it. Actually, that was perfect. That's actually true, though.
And then when you don't honor it, sorry, Michelle, when you don't honor it, people aren't learning, right? Where did this come from? How did it get here? Like, it didn't just appear. It's none of this new age crap. Like, cut it out. There's no such thing as new age. This is ancient wisdom. So let's call it what it is, and let's start teaching and honoring and teaching each other what it is and where it comes from, so we can acknowledge, right? We can say, okay, you know, we can appreciate it that much more.
Actually, I wanted you to talk about, or kind of explain to people listening. You said decolonizing
Wellness.
Oh, wellness. Can you explain what you meant when you said that?
Yeah, so taking our spaces back. So, you know, really coming full circle. So a lot of our practices, like yoga, that's a prime example, have been whitewashed, right? And westernized. And when you think of colonization, you think of the European settlers coming in and imposing their way, whether it's, you know, missionizing, so you know, bringing the Christian missionaries in, forcing their way, taking away what tradition and culture and ancient wisdom, ancient practices were there in the first place, i.e. Turtle Island, where we live in Canada. And so when you start seeing practices like yoga, you start hearing them chant Om, and you see the Om symbol, and you know, it starts to take on this sort of capitalistic sort of, you know, let's make some clothes and look this way, and make it very expensive to join. And so suddenly now you're taking what was extremely accessible to everybody, and what was spiritual, and what was accessible and spiritual and very what's the word, sacred. You're taking a practice and you're watering it down, and you're packaging it in a different way to make money, and losing that connection to where it came from and its roots, and really,
So making it commercial.
dishonoring it. Yeah, making it commercial. And that's just one example. There are many, especially coming out now. There's so many. It's interesting, you know, it's interesting to see what's coming up. It's beautiful in a way that people are becoming more aware of wellness and spirituality, but it's really important when I look at some of the platforms that folks have to just scroll through the platform. Does it look diverse? Mm-hmm. Right away you can see that it's like, okay, it's pretty white. Let's look at what they're saying now. Let's look at what they're showing. Let's see what they're sharing and they're teaching. And there's so many practitioners out there that are stealing, that are appropriating, that are taking ancient wisdom practices and calling it their own. And that's, you know, that's where I say decolonize that shit. We are not going to continue to colonize um, these ancient practices because we want to make money and feel good about ourselves, that we're helping to heal the world. It's really important that we make those connections and we honor the truths of the folks that held it for so long, you know.
But what would you say would be the benefits of creativity to support growth and wellness?
Well, I think that, you know, I was saying before, you know, using creativity to express ourselves, to tell our stories is a wonderful platform in and of itself. And, you know, a lot of folks, a lot of clients will say, oh, I'm not an artist. I'm not creative. But little do they know getting dressed that morning was creative. Cooking that meal that evening was creative. Putting together a schedule is creative. Like there's so many ways to be creative. We have to open our minds to what creativity actually means. Planting a garden is creative. So, you know, it opens our minds in a way that to, we get to see different possibilities, right? We get to see different ways of looking at something when we can open our minds creatively, so that the creative process allows people to go to places maybe they never thought that they could. And it's just, you know, to imagine, to visualize. For example, I have a group of women that I'm working with right now around the parent and father wound. So our very first hurts and pains ever. And those are really tough because they're really deep. They're very, very deep wounds. And what's happened is because we've had those deep wounds, then we've, you know, made some choices along the way that even now further perpetuates those, you know, and hurts those spaces. So we asked them to create a safety container through art making for their inner child. And what does that look like? What does a safety container for your inner child look like? And a container could be anything. A container could just be this, the space of the piece of art that you're making. It could be one woman came up with a beautiful cave, and within the cave there were flowers, and within the flowers there were three butterflies, and one butterfly symbolized her her playful child, the child who wanted to be free and playful. The other one was that strong child who sort of took on the hurt and protected her, was the protector. And the third one was that hurt child who was, you know, kind of wanted to hide. And it was really interesting because she got to see the different layers, right? See, it just opened her mind to these different sides of her and the needs of that inner child, the needs, what she needed within that space for safety, for nurturing, for love. So these are ways we can sort of create, be creative about the process, around the process of healing. And another, and then put words to it. So then when she's describing her creation and her process, she's telling her story. And she doesn't even realize, okay, now I'm telling my story. Whereas before she created the piece of art, it was kind of hard to go there. You know what I'm saying? So it opened her up to be able to tell her story. There's been many times where I've worked with children and youth where, you know, there's no talking, there's no getting through, or there's no, they just don't feel comfortable, right? To speak about some of the tougher emotions. So in that art making and in having, you know, having some time to create, they are able to then describe, oh, this color. I'll ask them what color sort of matches your emotions right now. So what color would you put down if for anger? What color would you put down for sadness? And then, you know, then I can say, you know, what's making you angry? What's making you sad? And then pull out some of the things because they've decided, they've come to a place now where they're a little bit more comfortable, right? And then there's the fun factor. Like creativity really takes us to this space of innocence and just sort of letting go. A lot of folks, again, when they say they're not creative or whatever, I'll enter into a creative process and it's not about the piece. A lot of people get hung up on what it's going to look like. Yeah. And I say, listen, it's not about the end result. It's about the journey. So when we are journeying through a creative process, it's about letting go. and surrendering and allowing sort of that innocence and that playfulness to come out. And as adults, I know for me, sometimes that's a place that I forget about and I take for granted, and I don't tap into as much as I should. And usually my children will remind me to tap back into that. But it's this sense of freedom to just be, to just say or draw or put out what it is you want to put out and not have any judgment around it, especially judgment of self. I think we're sort of like, ooh, how's this? Yeah. The creative process allows for that space to just let go and just do it, you know? So yeah, it's beautiful. It's a really beautiful process if you allow it to take you, you know?
How did you get into this? Like, how did this
Yeah. Yeah, art and writing have always been a part of who I am. I grew up in adversity as a child, and there was a lot of traumatic events going on around me. And I found that creating art did a few things for me. It was, of course, a way to distract me from what was going on. I was able to sort of escape and be taken and my focus into something that I enjoyed. Mm-hmm. So it really allowed me to be distracted, but also there was an element of creating something for me that I controlled, because the environment around me was so like out of my control, that I could create a piece within my control. So that helped me to sort of take that ownership, and then express my emotions. So if in that moment I was feeling sad, I'd probably make a pretty sad picture, you know, or angry, I'd make an angry picture. So it allowed me to sort of process what I was going through. And I didn't realize it at the time, but when I started to create art as an adult, I started to realize that that's what I was doing. And I had a hard time, because what I was doing was I was transitioning into a creative process from a place of power. And I wasn't used to that, because I didn't realize that that's what I was doing as a child. I was creating from a place of power as a child, but it usually happened when I was in pain. Okay. But as an adult now, fast forward, I was starting to create from a place of happiness and joy. And so that really took time. And when I started doing that, I realized how powerful this tool is. And I'd say about 6 years ago now, I volunteered to do an art club at my children's school, just a lunchtime once a week, do a little art club for the kids to just have a break, have a creative break. And this art club we ended up having to do 2 days of the week. We ended up having a wait list of kids. I ended up creating a parent volunteer committee around it, because it was so big. And it just showed me, and that was 6 years ago. That's when Jothy Creative Wellness came to be. It showed me that, okay, this is needed. The kids need it. There's not a lot of room for creative expression within our education system. And understanding that creativity can be used to learn. So I started to use that as an arts education space for me. And then I embarked in doing this for schools, many boards and schools, community organizations, youth organizations. And it was based in wellness. It was based around mental health and wellness, social issues like identity, social justice, racism, poverty, but like using the context of using that frame of art making and creativity to tell our stories. So it's been a beautiful process. And I realize, again, when it comes to wellness and mental health, there's many ways, right? So that's where I started to expand my repertoire and my offerings, and arriving at a place like now.
Yeah. Well, it's great what you do. I mean, like it's awesome. Like I said, I seriously see myself signing up for a session or something.
Come to her space. It's amazing. Interestingly enough, we are going through a forgiveness process right now at her space. in October. We're doing every Wednesday evening, a group of women. We're embarking on our healing of our inner child. So the forgiveness, it's healing the mother and father wound and forgiving our parents. And a few folks reached out to me and asked me if I would consider doing partners and couples. And I said, wow, I never really thought of that. So what I did, my co-facilitator, Carrie Sutra, and she's part of our team. Carrie, she's the relationship and intimacy coach. And I decided to open up November for couples. And it's not only for couples, it's for singles too. It's also for siblings. It's also for best friends. I just feel like when we continue to do the work around our early wounds, we now go into attachment wounds. So remember when I was saying, you know, those earlier traumas then lead to choices that, you know, and so attachment wounds are a continuation of the parent, mother, and father wound. And what attachment wounds are is those relationships that really left us feeling like, what the hell just happened? You know, those relationships that have hurt us along the way, and how we take those hurts now into the next relationship, whether it's like mistrust or lack of confidence, that kind of stuff. And so looking at the attachment wound in our relationships. So I really feel like I didn't want to just limit it to couples. I wanted, you know, men, women, friends, and siblings to come in, because I feel like the attachment wound shows up in so many of our relationships. And how do we navigate and heal from that wound and start to really set healthy boundaries and have healthy relationships, whether it's with friends, family, or lovers, right? So I wanted to open it up to men, women, everybody, and also open it up to the LGBTQ2S community, because I feel like we all can relate to the attachment wound. We can all relate to being hurt in relationships. We can all understand that we need healing around that. So I really wanted to make it accessible. And I'm actually, you know, embarking on putting together some campaigns and fundraisers around creating accessibility to these offerings. Because of course, you know, I have to be viable and sustainable for my own family, but I really want to be able to offer this to everybody so everybody can access it. So, you know, we're going to be open up funding, asking for doing fundraisers around it so we can create accessibility for everybody.
Nice. Okay,
Yeah.
so you need to let us know how to contact you, because I feel like
Yeah.
we're going to have a lot of people contacting you, because your offerings are awesome and they're healing, and they're and it's things that, like, I can honestly say some of the stuff you said in the show, like, it's not stuff that you even thought about, but are actually an issue, or could, yeah, they are issues, right?
Yeah. You can find me at my website which is www.jothi.ca. That's JOTHI.ca. You can also find me on Instagram at Jothi Creative Wellness. Actually, it's Jothi_creative is my handle on Instagram. Herspace, at Herspace_1 is the Instagram handle. If you identify as a woman, please join us. I do have women only groups. I usually do it bi-monthly, so every other month we'll be doing women only focused healing groups, healing circles. And there's always a theme. I always find that I work well when I align with the seasons. So the fall's idea of letting go and releasing some things really brought me to this like idea of forgiveness. And that's where the forgiveness sessions were born. So yeah, check out what's coming up. We won't do anything in December because of the holiday season, but we'll be back in January with Herspace, the next Herspace cycle. And then Jothi Creative Wellness, we're coming out with our attachment wound sessions in November. Registration is open now, and it's going to be very powerful. Space is limited because we wanted to have a more intimate group. There are going to be men and women, and, like, you know, it's going to be a real mixed mixed group, but we wanted to make sure that it's an intimate space. It's not too large. So yeah, registration's open for that. And yeah, get in touch with me if you will have any questions. It's really important that I'm always up for dialogue and conversation around the work I do and who's out there. So please get in touch with me if you have any questions or want to talk about stuff.
And you're delivering this virtually, right? There's no
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, interestingly enough, Her Space was born in 2019, and we were garnering some really great momentum around in-person circles. But here we are. We've pivoted to online, and it's actually been a real blessing because I have folks from all over the world now coming on to my sessions, and I never really dreamed that could ever happen. So I'm opening my heart to the abundance that's following with this online presence. I'm liking it. So we'll see how it goes. I have added to my scope this idea of science and how there is scientific evidence and proof and studies and research that shows that the work that we're doing around healing, forgiveness, reclamation actually has an impact on our brain, our physiology, our psychology. And so it just makes it that much more impactful, right? So there's a whole section now that I've added. We have a researcher that's on board, a neuroscience postgraduate student who's doing wonderful work, Angeli P. And she's our researcher. She's going to be showing the evidence of our work out there that's been documented and researched, how effective it is. So I'm really excited for that. And yeah, just meditation. I'd love to end with a little mini medi if you're up for
Oh my God, that's awesome.
yeah. So I just ask all the viewers, anyone listening, to just close your eyes and take a deep breath in through the nose and releasing through your mouth, exhaling, allowing your shoulders and your face and your body to soften as you exhale. And breathe deeply at your own pace, taking in your power, taking in your light and your essence and your love, and releasing with each exhale, surrendering to spirit, knowing that you are being held, knowing that you are enough, knowing that you are worthy, and giving thanks for this breath. As you inhale deeply, inhale your power, inhale your essence, inhale the love and the peace that you deserve, and exhale and let go and trust that all will be taken care of. And when you are ready, you can come back to awareness. Oh my God, yeah. It's a very short one. I just sort of did
okay. You're like expected to get tons of emails and stuff. Like you're amazing. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Jothy, for being a part of the show and for breaking down the importance of wellness practices. I also want to thank you for listening to that latest episode. I hope that it enlightened and helped you. Just a reminder, you can subscribe to the Words with Michelle, the podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. If you have time, please feel free to leave a review of the show. You can also listen to the shows on my blog at wordswithmichelle.com. If you have any questions or like to provide a comment or feedback, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me at michelle@wordswithmichelle.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.